They called me poor at the family table,
Loud.
in front of everyone. 5 minutes later, the bank called to confirm my $3.8 million portfolio. Also loud. Also in front of everyone. Hi, I'm Mars Corley, the invisible daughter. The one they erased from family documents, party invitations, even photo frames because I didn't fit their version of a perfect legacy. Ever been humiliated by people who share your blood? Told you were less than, only to find out you were worth more than they ever imagined? Tell me, what would you do if the people who raised you tried to bury your name, but accidentally left behind the proof that could bury theirs? Let's go back to the day they tried to write me out, and I picked up the pen instead. You called me poor. The bank called me powerful. The air inside the Corley family living room was warm, dense with the scent of cinnamon potpourri and calculated pleasantries. I stood just beyond the arched entryway, one heel still planted outside the rug's border. The sound of my sister's voice carried smoothly across the oak-paneled room. And that's why I believe consolidating the Silas Fund under one lead will help us steward the legacy more efficiently, Delana declared, standing in front of the fireplace like she'd been cast in a Southern Living special. Her hair was perfectly curled, her pastel blouse perfectly pressed, and her smile, frozen in that pageant-worthy poise that always made people think she was kind. No one expected me to walk in. No one even glanced at the door. I cleared my throat. Delana's eyes flicked toward me. Her expression didn't falter. Oh, she said lightly, like I'd just popped up from a distant past. Do you still remember the way home? I didn't answer. I walked further in, each step echoing louder than it should have. Around the room, people turned, distant cousins, church ladies in pearls, Uncle Reese sipping lemonade from a mason jar. Everyone had the same look, surprise laced with discomfort. I wasn't invited, and yet I was here. I took a seat on the outer edge of the couch. Delana returned to her monologue about fiscal responsibility, her eyes occasionally flicking to me like I was a misbehaving child she might have to discipline. When she mentioned sacrifice and family unity, I couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. Finally, I spoke. Has anyone discussed what happens to Grandpa Silas's residential lots? Silence. Then a tight-lipped smile from my mother, Norma. Sweetheart, she said, voice dripping with pity. I didn't do anything to deserve it, did I? I live on a salary. Delana supports the family. I let her words settle in the room like wet ash. Around me, I caught a cousin whisper something to their partner. The clink of ice in someone's glass sounded louder than it should have. I sat back.
Calm.
Silent. My fingers curled around the edge of my phone resting in my lap. 3 years ago, I'd wired $42,000 to cover the property tax bill they conveniently forgot. 2 years ago, I cleared the last of the second mortgage on their shop, even though they never transferred ownership as promised. And last winter, I paid for the roof replacement because insurance is moving slow, Dad said. But my name was still not on a single deed. Then my phone buzzed. I pressed accept. Speaker, please, I said to the room and tapped the speaker icon. A crisp male voice came through. Ms. Corley, this is Trent Caldwell from First Regional. We're confirming the updated beneficiary status on the Silas Legacy portfolio. Congratulations, it's officially yours, $3.8 million in real estate-backed assets. As the bank representative's voice echoed through the speaker, $3.8 million. Time seemed to fragment. The ambient hum of the ceiling fan halted in my ears. A faint whir of wind outside brushed against the window. And inside the room, everything slowed. I could see the shift in expressions, a cousin's eyes widening, a neighbor clutching her pearls, Delana's frozen smirk finally cracking as she pressed her lips shut tight. Somewhere to my left, a child whispered to her mother, Why is everyone looking at Miss Mars like she's a stranger? I didn't flinch. My fingers instinctively found the silver ring on my right hand, one that Grandpa Silas had slipped to me on my graduation day. He'd called it a token of permanence. I never truly understood what he meant until now. I looked up toward the family photo wall, the one Mother curated every year. There, above the sideboard, hung the enlarged shot of our Easter brunch from 2015. The original had all 5 of us. But in the version on this wall, my face was conveniently cropped out by the decorative wooden frame. Delena's image, by contrast, was reprinted in a separate gold frame right beside it. I stared at it for just a moment longer, then turned back to the room, letting the silence bake in deeper. A fork clattered onto the hardwood. The room froze. Delena's jaw clenched so tight, I could hear the enamel grind. Norma's hand hovered midair like she'd been struck by lightning. I didn't look at anyone directly. I simply stood up and adjusted the cuffs of my blazer. Funny, I said, scanning the room slowly. For someone who never did enough, I seem to be the only one who owns anything outright. Delena stepped forward, voice thick with sugar-laced venom. So what? Grandpa liked to throw gifts. Doesn't mean you earned it. I tilted my head. Then maybe you should ask why he left it behind a clause you never read. No one moved. I walked out, the silence trailing behind me like a ghost too stunned to keep up. Outside, the Texas sun was blinding. I stood by the driveway, letting the heat wrap around me like armor. A mockingbird chartered nearby, oblivious to the shift that had just fractured generations of curated silence. My phone vibrated again. This time, a text from an unknown number. Push this further, and you'll regret it. Some things are better left buried. I smiled.
Calmly.
Almost kindly. In my bag sat a manila folder. Inside was a scan of a financial transfer dated 2 years ago. Grandpa Silas's signature. My name, clear as day. They thought I wouldn't come. They thought I wouldn't fight. They forgot who I was before they even tried to erase me. But I remember. Funny how names disappear from documents when you're not around to defend them. I said it under my breath as I stepped into the county clerk's office in Denton. The linoleum floors squeaked with every step, and the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like they were tired of existing too. I'd been here before, years ago, when Grandpa Silas brought me along to file a permit for the east pasture fencing. Back then, he said, Mars, paperwork is memory on paper. If they mess with it, they mess with the truth. I was about to find out just how true that was. Behind the glass window, a young clerk barely looked up as I slid my request through the slot. Quitclaim deeds filed under Ronald Corley for the past 5 years, I said. She took the slip, typed lazily, then turned toward the printer. A few minutes later, she handed me a manila folder. Anything else? Not yet. I walked to the far bench, away from the others. The folder was light, maybe 5 or 6 pages. I flipped through them. The last one hit me in the gut. Property, Lake House, Cedar Hill. Transfer, Ronald C. Corley. Transferee, Delena Corley Rains. Filed, March 15th. Notarized. My heart thudded once, hard. The signature looked off. The capital, R, curved too sharply. The C lacked the exaggerated loop my father always used. I had seen his real signature hundreds of times. This one was like someone copied it from memory, almost right, but not quite. And I knew exactly whose memory it might have come from. I pulled out my phone, snapped a photo, and walked back to the window. Can I get a certified copy of this page? The clerk glanced at it. For the first time, her brow furrowed. You need this for legal filing? Eventually, I said. Right now, I just need truth. She nodded, stamped it, and slid it back. Then, in a low voice, she muttered, "I see this more than I'd like to admit." I didn't reply. I just left. When I pulled up to the old family auto shop, the smell of motor oil greeted me like an accusation. Dad was at the counter, flipping through a ledger like it actually meant something. He looked up when the bell rang, then looked back down like I was a customer asking for a discount. "Didn't expect you." "Wasn't planning to." I stepped forward, pulled the deed copy from my bag, and laid it in front of him. "Did you sign this?" He didn't even glance at the paper. "Why would I not? It's all staying in the family." I kept my voice steady. "Then why does the signature look like Mom's?" His jaw clenched. "Don't start with this. You're my father, not my adversary. But if you're letting people forge your name for family unity, then maybe, I don't know which side you're on." He stood abruptly. A drawer slammed shut behind him. "You think you're above all this now?" "No," I said. "I think you all decided I was beneath it." I turned to go, but something tugged at me. I walked toward the old utility cabinet in the back, my cabinet. I hadn't opened it in years. But when I did, my old steel-toed boots were still there, covered in dust, left exactly where I'd placed them after my last shift. Like I'd never mattered enough to even be erased. Just ignored. I left, quietly, as if nothing had been said, but everything had. Have you ever realized your family didn't just forget you? They decided you didn't belong? That kind of quiet rejection that cuts deeper than any insult? If you've ever felt erased by the people who should have seen you first, drop a comment number 7 below. Now, let's see what I do with that pain. That evening, at the cafe on Elm Street, I sat across from Dr. Kyle Timmons, a handwriting expert. He had a binder full of samples and a look that told me he'd done this too many times. "This," he said, pointing to the scanned copy of the deed, "shows inconsistencies not present in Ronald C. Corley's verified samples. It's likely forged. Can you certify that?" I already did. He handed me a signed report. This could hold up in probate review. I hadn't realized how tightly I was gripping my coffee until I saw it ripple. I set the cup down slowly. "Thanks, Dr. Timmons. You're not the first daughter I've helped this year," he said softly. I nodded. There wasn't much else to say. That night, I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and dragged the new files into my locked folder labeled Inheritance Integrity. Then I opened my email. To Delana Corley Rains, Norma Corley, Aunt Lylene. Subject found. Attachment 2. No message. No emotion. Just truth. I clicked send. Then I turned off my phone, slid it away from me, and waited. An hour later, the photo arrived. Delana, seated at some sunny patio lunch with her charity circle. Her phone screen lit up. Her face went white. One of the donors next to her leaned away, like the shame might be contagious. The sender was a friend from college, now an events assistant at that same nonprofit. She didn't even bother with a caption. The image said enough. Not every confrontation needs fireworks. Sometimes it just needs timing. Another message came in. Unknown number. One line. Push this and you'll lose more than property. I didn't blink. I opened my laptop again, scrolled down the folder. Alongside the deed and signature report was one more file, an old scanned update from Grandpa Silas's trust. It listed my name, dated 2 years ago, with language that was suddenly more powerful than anything my family had ever said to me. They thought I wouldn't check. They were wrong. I wasn't fighting for revenge. Not yet. But now? Now I was armed. Let's see how long that smile holds when the mask cracks in public. The Omni Dallas glowed like a chandelier from the street. Inside, the ballroom was a gold-lit cathedral of ego, white-draped tables, strings of jazz humming above the hum of socialites, and Delana Corley Rains basking in her curated spotlight. I moved through the lobby quietly, my black dress crisp, unembellished. It wasn't meant to scream. It was meant to cut. "Welcome to the Women of Grace Gala," chirped a volunteer at the check-in table. I nodded, accepting my badge without a word. Guest of honor wasn't printed on it, but I knew I was about to become one. I remembered something then. Back when I was in college, scraping by on scholarships and microwaved ramen, trying to cover tuition while mom said they couldn't help. Delana had just come back from a breakthrough yoga retreat and wanted to start her own boutique. I gave her my entire summer savings. She hugged me tightly and whispered, "One day, I'll pay you back double." She never did, but she paid me in other ways, in erasure, in omission, in deliberate silence. In the third row, I took my seat just as the MC took the stage. Tonight, we honor a woman whose resilience, generosity, and leadership continue to inspire. A businesswoman, a philanthropist, and above all, a daughter committed to her family's legacy, Delana Corley Rains. Applause thundered. A spotlight followed her as she stepped up, white gown shimmering like a halo wrapped her in absolution. She raised her hand humbly, feigning modesty. "My parents taught me one thing above all," she began, voice soft and syrupy. "That family is the root of all legacy. That sacrifice, silent, constant sacrifice, is how women like me rise." Norma, sitting near the front, dabbed her eyes like someone in a staged funeral. The audience swooned. Flashbulbs flickered. I didn't clap. I reached for my phone, already prepared. On screen were 3 attachments, queued and ready. The forged deed report, the trust assignment dated 2 years ago naming me sole inheritor, and a voice recording, Norma's voice, saying, "Delana can carry this. Mars is too sensitive to manage wealth." I clicked. To guest list at womenofgrace.org. Subject: regarding Ms. Corley Rains' claim of legacy. Attachments 3. Then I hit send. Almost instantly the room changed. First one buzz. Then another. Then 50. Heads bowed to screens. Eyebrows lifted. One donor stood and whispered something to her assistant. A senator's wife muttered, "You need to see this." The MC hesitated. Delana kept smiling, but her jaw trembled. Her smile froze. I stood. Didn't speak. Just walked. I passed Norma, who blinked at me like she didn't recognize my face. I passed Delana, who refused to turn her head. I walked straight out of the ballroom, out into the marble corridor where chandeliers still glowed like nothing had happened. But inside, something cracked. I reached the parking garage just as my heels clicked past the last column of cement. The air smelled like Freon and cheap perfume.
My phone buzzed again.
Before I could check it, I heard fast steps. Mars. Delana's voice, lower now, stripped of public polish. I turned slowly. She was breathing hard, her gown clutching at her legs like guilt. "What do you want?" she hissed. I looked her dead in the eye. "Just clarity. You can't preach legacy when you forge the path to it." Her jaw twitched. "You can't prove anything that matters in court." I smiled, calm as the moon. "I don't need court. I just need the truth to circulate where your image matters." She didn't answer. Couldn't. Behind her, a group of gala staff peeked from the stairwell, unsure whether to help or hide. Her eyes flickered, panic, maybe, or fury, but I'd seen it before. Delana was the kind of woman who weaponized appearance. But tonight, I stripped it from her. I didn't scream. I didn't accuse. I sent one email and let the truth walk in on its own. Back at the ballroom, the projector behind the podium blinked. A preview window popped up just long enough. A sync device had mirrored its screen. Across 30 feet of velvet and flowers, it read in bold letters, "Forgery evidence, Mars Corley." Earlier in the program, Delana had stood confidently beside a digital slideshow and said with theatrical poise, "We stand for transparency." It was almost poetic that the projector betrayed her minutes later. Meanwhile, across the ballroom, Aisha Vell, an old friend of mine from undergrad who now ran PR for one of the gala's sponsors, read the email silently, smiled to herself, and texted me just 2 words. About time. As I reached my car, I pulled off the earrings my mother gave me when I turned 16. Tiny pearls. Symbolic. Safe. I dropped them in the nearest trash bin. Delana remained behind in the shadows of the garage, whispering into her phone. "She's going public," she said, voice shaking. "Either we shut this down now or we bury her." I stepped into the passenger side of Aileen Maris's car. She waited, laptop open, case files glowing. I closed the door. "Next move?" I asked. Aileen smiled. "We dismantle their foundation one lie at a time." They erased my name from the will, but forgot to read the footnotes. The old study still smelled like cedar and graphite, the scent of diligence. Light streamed through the narrow slats in the blinds, falling on stacked ledgers, sealed boxes, and dust-coated journals that hadn't been opened in decades. I had spent the better part of the morning combing through them, each folder a thread in the fabric of a legacy someone had tried so hard to unravel. And then I found it, tucked in the back of a locked cabinet, inside a folder labeled with faded ink, Property and Trusts Originals. There was an envelope inside, yellowed, sealed, with a script I hadn't seen in years, my grandfather's. Only for Marceline. Read with care. I sat down slowly, placing the envelope on the desk like it was sacred. My hand trembled only once as I broke the seal. Inside, a legal-sized document, heavier than it looked. My name was there, bold, typed in clear font. Primary beneficiary, Marceline Corley. But it was what came next that made my breath catch. A clause in the margin, handwritten but notarized, dated and sealed. Until her 35th birthday, no property transfer, reassignment, or liquidation shall be considered valid without written approval from the named beneficiary. I read it twice, then 3 more times, and then I wept, not from sadness, from the weight of being remembered, of being trusted. Grandpa Silas didn't just leave me something. He left me power. His voice echoed in my mind. From that summer I was 22, helping him reorganize files while the house buzzed with family chaos. He'd winked at me and said, "Law only works if someone reads to the last line." I'd laughed then. Now I understood. That joke was a message in a bottle. Hours later, I walked into Grant Lattimore's office. His legal books lined the walls like armor. I handed him the document. He adjusted his glasses, read silently, and let out a low whistle. "If this clause was never revoked or amended, it overrides any later documents lacking explicit dismissal," he said. "This is real power." "Will it hold?" He nodded. "More than that. It can freeze every transaction made under false assumptions. You can challenge every transfer Delana orchestrated." I didn't smile. I nodded. Then I asked him to attend a lunch. The table was dressed for civility. Linen napkins, polished silver, even a floral centerpiece that reeked of effort. Norma called it a family moment, a chance to mend things. Delana sat at the head of the table, Stanley on her right, Norma across from me, eyes painted with false peace. I didn't say much. Let the others talk. The usual, Delana's responsible stewardship, her sacrifices, her tireless commitment to the family's future. They spoke of legacy like I wasn't sitting right there. When dessert was served, I reached into my bag. I figured, I said, standing, if we're talking legacy, we should consult the source. I placed the will in the center of the table. Delana froze. What is this? The document you all missed while editing the future. Grant stepped forward from the hallway, holding a duplicate. I've reviewed it. This clause is authentic, notarized, and currently in effect. Silence crashed over the room. Then I read it aloud. In the event of any asset transfer prior to her 35th birthday, the named beneficiary reserves full veto power. No transaction may proceed without her written consent. I looked at Delana. Which means your entire paper empire just paused. She gasped. Norma dropped her spoon. Stanley stared at his plate like it might offer an escape. No one spoke. Have you ever stood up in a room full of people who underestimated you and realized they were finally, undeniably listening? That moment when silence breaks and you no longer need permission to be powerful? If you've claimed your voice like that, drop a comment number 9 below. Let's see how I move forward from here. Behind me, the portrait of Grandpa Silas hung above the fireplace. His eyes, painted in soft oils, seemed to watch the room. Not judging, just reminding. I reached out, ran a finger gently along the signature at the bottom of the document. It felt like touching memory, not power. I didn't come here to fight, I said. But I won't let you bury what he built. Or me. Norma's voice cracked. We can explain. I hope you do, I said, turning to go. In court. Then I took off the ring my mother had given me for my 21st birthday, a dainty silver band she once called a symbol of unity. I placed it on her dessert plate. No need to hold on to symbols that only pretend to mean something. As I reached the door, my phone buzzed. Aileen. I answered quietly. It's done, she said. The emergency motion is filed. The court will review the clause this week. Thank you, I said. And I walked out. Not triumphant. Just resolute. You stole in whispers. I speak in sworn testimony. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not in temperature, but in tone. Beige walls, polished wood, no room for charm. Just facts, silence, and the weight of truth waiting to land. I sat behind Aileen Maris, watching as Delana adjusted the sleeve of her gray blazer, eyes steady, but blinking more than usual. To our left, Norma smoothed the fabric of her coral blouse as if creases mattered more than consequences. My father, Stanley, sat 2 seats down from her, hands folded, shoulders slumped, looking like he wished he were anywhere else. I closed my eyes briefly and saw a younger version of myself, 10 years old, walking beside Grandpa Silas down these same courthouse halls. He had held my hand gently but firmly. Justice doesn't shout, sweetheart, he said as we passed the magistrate's chambers. It records, then it responds. I had nodded then, believing silence was virtue. Back when being good meant being small. Today, I had different beliefs. The judge entered. Court is now in session. Case 24, CV 871, Corley versus Corley. Delana's attorney rose, voice calm and oily. Your Honor, this matter arises from internal family misunderstandings, questions of interpretation rather than malice. Aileen stood, spine straight, voice sharp as surgical steel. This is not a misunderstanding. It is coordinated property fraud, executed through forgery, deception, and deliberate exclusion. A hush fell over the room. Even the reporters in the back stopped typing. The first exhibit, the forged signature analysis. On the screen, magnified strokes compared Ronald C. Corley's verified documents to the suspect's signature on the Cedar Ridge property transfer. This report, Aileen said, confirms without ambiguity that the signature on the quitclaim deed is falsified. Norma's hands trembled slightly. Delana kept her face neutral, but the tightness in her jaw betrayed her. She glanced quickly toward the gallery, likely scanning for funders. Second wave. Now, Aileen said, we play a recording. I gave a small nod. From the speakers, my sister's voice flowed like poison. Mars won't check. She's the weak one. Mom, trust me. We bury her before she notices. Then came Norma's quieter tone, syrup-sweet and surgical. She just wants to be loved.
We'll use that.
There was no background music, no theatrical cutaway, just a heavy stillness. The kind that grips every rib and suspends breath. Then, a whisper from the back. Did she just say that? A sponsor in the second row stood and left quietly. A board member scribbled something in her journal. The judge leaned forward slightly, brow tight. Delana blinked rapidly. Norma stared at her lap. Aileen allowed the silence to echo, then approached the bench. Your Honor, we now present the original notarized trust, containing a clause never revoked. I walked to the stand, slowly, deliberately. Around my neck, the chain was warm against my skin, the same chain Grandpa Silas had given me when I was 16. I had locked it away for years. Today it returned. This clause, I said, voice clear, grants me veto power over all Corley estate transactions until I turn 35. The judge flipped through the document, then looked at Aileen. This is valid? She nodded. It's enforceable and has not been superseded. The judge looked directly at Delana. Did you have prior knowledge of this clause? Delana's eyes darted to Norma. Did you even read it? Norma replied faintly, we thought she wouldn't notice. In that moment, the camera flash from the gallery caught Delana's face, frozen, unreadable, a woman unraveling under fluorescent lights. The judge cleared his throat and lifted his gavel. Effective immediately, all transfers, adjustments, and contractual dealings associated with the Corley estate are frozen. An independent audit and legal investigation into fiduciary misrepresentation will proceed under court oversight. The gavel hit wood, a sharp, satisfying crack. Delana turned to Stanley, pleading, wordless. But for the first time, my father didn't speak. He just lowered his head. Aileen whispered, well done. I nodded, emotion silent and steel-edged. Behind me, another sponsor jotted into her notepad. I caught a glimpse. Remove Delana, credibility risk. Outside the courtroom, the sunlight felt unearned. I paused on the courthouse steps. Cameras angled in. A reporter leaned forward. Miss Corley, was this about justice or revenge? I met his lens. Both. One to restore what's mine. The other to remind them I remember. My phone buzzed. A message from Grant. Found another clause. Transfer of full estate power to you in proven fraud. Still active. I stared across the stone plaza, wind brushing against my blouse. And I knew the storm wasn't over. It was only gathering. They rewrote the family story without me, but the house remembered who built it. The keys felt heavier than I imagined, not because of weight, but because of what they unlocked. Grant slid the folder across the polished mahogany table, his expression unreadable. Aileen sat beside me, one hand resting lightly on her tablet. These finalize the transfer, Grant said. You now hold controlling interest in the Corley Construction shares, the trust portfolio, and full title to the Silas property. I signed. With each stroke, a tether snapped. The last remnants of what they tried to bind me with were now undone. Aileen watched me, You didn't just survive them, she said quietly. You outgrew them. That word stayed with me. Outgrew. On the drive home, I remembered the summer I was 17. After school, I'd ride my bike straight to Grandpa Silas's. We'd paint the fence under the late sun, sort his stacks of tax folders, cook pasta with too much garlic. One day, wiping sweat from his brow, he'd said, "Some things hold more than memory. They hold truth." Back then, I only nodded. Now I understood. That afternoon, I pulled up to the Silas house alone. The hedges had been trimmed, but the oak trees still leaned like they were listening. I walked around back and found the old wooden sign, half buried under weeds. Faded, chipped, but still legible. Welcome. I didn't repaint it. I hammered it back in with the rusted nail.
I wanted the age to stay.
Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and lemon oil. Not hollow, just still. I let my hand drift across the worn hallway panels, past the living room window where I used to catch the sun, past the kitchen counter with the nicked tile Grandpa always meant to fix. In the study, I unwrapped a small frame from my bag, a photo of us, side by side in the garden, dirt on our knees, wide smiles that hadn't learned how to guard. I hung it above the fireplace. No edits, no filters. Just us. The light shifted on the floorboards. Soft amber. I lit the lamp. My body moved slowly, deliberately, like it was relearning how to be in a space that no longer needed defense. That evening, my phone buzzed. A voicemail from Norma. Her voice was strained, quieter than I'd ever heard. "We didn't know how much you meant until you left. Maybe we didn't want to." A pause. "I don't expect a reply. I just hope you're okay." I didn't cry. I didn't respond. I turned the phone face down and left it on the table. In the kitchen, I made tea in Grandpa's old blue floral cup. It chipped years ago, but he'd refused to replace it. "Some things are worth holding on to," he used to say. Later in the week, I visited the Corley office. The front still bore the same clean logo. Inside, the receptionist gave a practiced smile as I walked past her without a word. Down the hall, I stopped where the family legacy wall still hung, 3 polished brass names, no trace of mine. I took out the photo from my coat. Easter Sunday. The real one. I pinned it to the corkboard nearby, beside a flyer for annual family picnic. My face was visible, arms around Dad, eyes closed from laughing. It wasn't revenge. It was record. On Sunday, the air outside was velvet warm. I sat on the back steps with a book in hand and the chipped teacup beside me. The silence wasn't empty, it breathed. A paper crane danced in the breeze, landing by my foot. A girl from next door came running. "It flew too far," she called. I smiled and handed it to her. "Don't lose it again." She nodded and skipped away. I watched her go, then picked up the crane again and placed it on Grandpa's altar. "We keep what matters," I whispered. "We let go what doesn't." In that moment, the wind shifted. Not loudly, just enough to stir the wind chimes, new ones I had hung from the porch, soft steel instead of copper. A note, calm and steady. Evening came. I pulled a small book from the shelf. How to Start a Legacy Fund. A yellow tag stuck out from the second chapter. Then the mail arrived. Among the routine envelopes was one marked from a firm in Oregon. Inside, "Dear Ms. Corley, we're writing to inform you that Silas C. Corley established an international real estate fund in your name, with you as sole trustee, effective upon proof of fiduciary breach by other heirs. Records confirm the fund is now active." I stood at the window, envelope in hand, watching the horizon fade into dusk. The fight was over, but the legacy? It had only just begun. I stand now in a house filled with silence, not the kind born of absence, but of peace. They tried to erase me, but in the end, I reclaimed more than just property. I reclaimed myself. What I've learned is this: silence only protects the guilty when the brave stay quiet. But the moment you stand up, even with the whisper of truth, lies crumble, no matter how long they've stood. Have you ever had to choose between peace and justice? Between being accepted and being respected? Share your story in the comments. I read every word, and maybe, just maybe, someone else out there needs to hear it too. If you thought this was powerful, wait until you see what happens when betrayal comes from a best friend, not family. Hit that follow button. This is only the beginning.